While brake kits vary between vehicles, the fundamentals are the same. This video is designed to cover most applications. If you have a specific need, you may find it in the MPB catalog or on one of our websites.
Before beginning the installation, refer to your owner's manual for proper safety considerations and correct torque specifications for your vehicle. When referring to the manual, note the correct location for placing the jack to lift the vehicle. Raise the vehicle to a comfortable working height. Remove the wheel. Before removing the drum assembly, support the lower A arm of the vehicle with a stand. Failure to support the lower A arm could cause serious injury. Disconnect the brake hose from the hard line at the frame using a line wrench if possible. Remove the clip that holds the hose to the hose line bracket. Notice the support of the lower A arm. This is a very important safety consideration. Remove the cotter pins from the outer tie rod end, the upper ball joint, and the lower ball joint. Inspect the cotter pins, and if they appear rusted or old, replace them when you install the disc system. Remove the nut from the outer tie rod end. Remove the upper and lower ball joint nuts. Separate the outer tie rod end and the upper and lower ball joints with a ball joint splitter and mallet. Remove the drum brake assembly as a complete unit. Inspect the ball joints for excessive wear and play. Check the rubber boots for any sign of damage. If you are at all uncertain of the condition of the ball joints, replace them at this time. Clean the ball joints with a rag. Remove the steering arm, clean, and inspect it. Be aware that there is a right and left side steering arm, so don't mix them up. Install the disc spindle. Install the ball joint nuts and snug them up with your fingers. Check that the spindle swings smoothly. Torque the upper and lower ball joint nuts to the specifications as stated in your maintenance manual. Install the cotter pins. Bend them over and cut off any excess. Install the caliper mounting bracket and steering arm onto the disc spindle. Install the outer tie rod end. Tighten the nut to the correct specifications and install the cotter pin. Bend the pin and trim off the excess as before. Check the fit of the bearings onto the spindle. If the bearings are too tight, sand the spindle lightly with some emery cloth. After sanding, be sure to clean the spindle before trying the fit of the bearing. The bearings should slide on easily and not bind. Grease the bearings with a good high-temperature bearing grease. Grease the outer race and then the inner race with an adequate amount of bearing grease. Install the inner bearing into the rotor. Install the rear grease seal by tapping it lightly in a circle with a hammer until it is seated completely. Notice how the seal sits flush all the way around. Install the rotor onto the spindle. Install the outer bearing, followed by the keyed washer and the spindle nut. Run the nut in on the spindle until it is tight. and then back it off slightly until the cotter pin can be inserted. Spin the rotor to check that it rotates freely. Install the cotter pin, bend it over, and cut off any excess length. Install the dust cover by tapping it on until it is properly seated. Before installing the caliper, be sure that the bleeder screw faces up as indicated. Install the caliper with the pads onto the bracket. Notice how the bleeder faces up so that air does not get trapped in the caliper when bleeding the system. Install the hose bolt into the banjo fitting of the hose. Be sure that the sequence is bolt, washer, hose fitting, washer, caliper. The brass fitting of the hose must be sandwiched between the two copper washers. Tighten the hose onto the caliper securely. Attach the hose to the brake line bracket at the frame. Be sure to tap the hose clip to secure the hose to the bracket. Insert the hard line into the hose and tighten securely. Now that everything is assembled, go back and check that all bolts are tightened and that all cotter pins have been installed. Double check the tightness of all hose connections. Remove the support from under the A-arm and clean the rotor. Install the tire onto the rotor and repeat the same procedure on the other side. Now you are ready to begin the power booster and master cylinder installation. Before removing the old master cylinder, be sure to disconnect the pushrod clevis from the brake pedal under the dash. Disconnect the brake lines from the master cylinder. Loosen the bolts and remove the old master cylinder with the pushrod from the firewall. Reinstall the pushrod clevis onto the end of the booster rod. Insert the clevis into the hole in the firewall and mount the booster to the firewall using the 4 studs that protrude from the firewall. If 4 studs do not exist on the firewall, drill holes in the proper location and use bolts to secure the booster to the firewall. Reconnect the clevis to the lower hole on the brake pedal. When going from a manual brake master to a power brake unit, the rod must be lowered 1 inch on the pedal. Be sure to insert the cotter pin. Adjust the rod so that there is about 1/4 inch play in the pedal. If your brake pedal does not have a second hole 1 inch lower on the pedal, you must drill a hole in that location. Be sure that you insert the clevis with the cotter pin. Be sure to run a vacuum hose from the booster check valve to the manifold or to the vacuum source at the back of the carburetor. At idle, your engine must produce 16 to 20 inches of vacuum for maximum booster performance. Note the depth of the piston hole in the master cylinder. You will need to use a short pin in the booster if the hole in the master cylinder piston is shallow. If you have a deep hole in the master cylinder piston, you must use a longer pin in the booster. Install the pin into the booster and place the master cylinder onto the 2 mounting studs. Install the combination valve with the bracket onto the driver's side master cylinder stud. Connect the front line from the master to the valve, followed by the rear line from the master to the valve. If the lines do not fit properly, they may be bent to fit. This is how the installed booster master combo valve should look. The valve will have one line that feeds the rear of the braking system. To feed the front of the braking system, you may use either 2 lines out of the valve, with 1 line to the front right and the other to the front left, or you may plug one of the outlets and run a single line to a splitter block. Remember, when reinstalling the booster rod clevis onto the pedal, be sure to use the lower hole on the brake pedal.